What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken, after blowing out one Florida team, lose to the other one, falling 6-2 to the Tampa Bay Lightning. In a game that, well, I think we can all pretty much just go ahead and forget about after we're done here. I mean, honestly, I kind of wish I could just forget about it now and skip this whole thing entirely. I mean, look, I still very much enjoy making these videos after every game. I wouldn't have gotten through last season if I didn't. I certainly enjoy it more after wins, which we've had more of this season, and that's been awesome. And a lot of the times, even after losses, it's, well, maybe enjoy's the wrong word after a loss, but it's still nice to have a way to get out some of the frustration with how the game went, or at least look back and see some of the things that went well and what needs to change to get back to winning. Though, again, I will say that especially towards the end of last year, it did get a little bit old talking about the same kinds of losses for the same kinds of reasons. That, though, has definitely not been a problem so far this year. But this game, I mean, I really don't know what to say about the game. The Kraken didn't play particularly well. They certainly didn't play a very full game. Really only tried, it seemed like, for about 20 minutes of it. And at the end of the day, they got beat by a better team that's playing better at the moment. And yes, even though the Kraken are having a very good start to the season and are still a top 10 or 11 team in the NHL, I don't think it's a stretch to say, and I don't think too many people would be arguing with the statement that the Lightning are a better team. I mean, they haven't been to 3 Stanley Cups in a row for no reason. Now, even at that, as we will get to, the Kraken still did plenty of frustrating things to help Tampa Bay out along the way. But this still didn't even have the same feel as a lot of Kraken losses, where the team kind of hangs around throughout the game, a few mental lapses end up putting them behind, they battle back, but just as it seems like they might actually get back into the game, they do another dumb thing and the puck ends up at the back of the net again, and eventually the game gets away from them. This one, they just kind of don't start on time, do start to fight back, but then everything just kind of collapses at once, and once it collapses, it just kind of seemed like it was over at that point, which was just about halfway through the game. And I suppose, since I already brought up last season, and this kind of looked like a last season Kraken kind of game, with that having been said, the main scapegoat for a lot of fans, and certainly national media last season for how things went for the Kraken, was Philip Grubauer and just, I guess, Kraken goaltending in general. But as any of you who watched the games, or at least some of my videos last year know, I didn't think that that was completely fair, and honestly, more of the problem was just the terrible defensive structure or lack thereof in front of him for the vast majority of the season. However, with this game again, yeah, this game was definitely more what it looks like when a goaltender loses the game for you. Or at least gets you to a point where you're in a position to lose, and then from there the Kraken kind of just let things roll that direction. Before we get into the game, though, and the specifics of how all this mess happened, which, I mean, I guess that's why we're here, so we'll get there. There were some lineup and actually roster changes for the Kraken coming into this game. First of all, some actually good news for the Kraken, or almost good news. I guess it turns out to be a little bit bittersweet, but it looked like coming into the game that Schultz was going to be okay to play in this one after taking that nasty, dirty hit from Lomberg against the boards at the end of the Florida game. Which, now that we're on the subject, and I'm sorry we're going to go on a bit of a tangent here, if there was one thing to be legitimately angry about today as a Kraken fan, it wasn't the 6-2 ugly loss that the Kraken didn't bother playing all of it in against the Lightning, which isn't to say you shouldn't be angry about the game. If you want to be, you have every reason to be. But still, the worst part was the way that the NHL decided to handle that Lomberg situation, which is to say that they decided to not handle it whatsoever. So honestly, at this point, I don't even know what to tell you anymore, other than the fact that I guess the NHL has no idea whatsoever what the heck they're doing when it comes to dirty plays like this one, or I guess even the Alexiak hit, if you want to consider that a dirty play, which honestly, I still don't even think that was that dirty of a hit. Yes, it was a bad hit. He deserved to get the 5-minute misconduct and kicked out of the game. I still think that that suspension was a little bit much, but especially when you compare it to what happened literally the next game to Schultz. Yeah, again, Alexiak has no priors, which for better or worse is something that the NHL says that they take into account when it comes to things like this. And somehow, even though, yes, again, his hit was bad, and yes, he did have time to pull up from that hit and not make it, which is what leads to that whole situation and his suspension. But with all that having been said, I think the context of the play should matter as well. With the Alexiak one, as the play's developing, he's just trying to go and lay a hit on the guy with the puck. Now again, he gets rid of the puck and Alexiak has time to not make the hit and still does, which is a problem. but it's not like he was going after a guy that didn't have the puck or didn't see the hit necessarily coming. Meanwhile, with the Lombard hit, not only does he go after Schultz dumps the puck around the corner, it's a play that is made purely out of revenge on Schultz, admittedly getting a little bit of a face rub in as they fight over the puck going into the boards. And I don't think that any sane person that has seen both of these hits would disagree with me on the fact that the Lombard one was a much dirtier hit. Sure, both are bad, but one of them is clearly an intent to injure, which Alexiak I don't think was trying to hurt the guy. That is supposed to be part of this situation, is the intent on injury. Meanwhile, with Lombard, there's no way to not see intent to injure with what he does to Schultz. But still, at the end of the day, not only does Alexiak get a 3-game suspension and a big fine on top of it, Lombard gets nothing, not even an investigation. For those of you who are not familiar with how this whole thing is supposed to work anyway, which actually might be a fair few people in the NHL front office itself, or at least the Department of Player Safety, certainly anyway, when a dirty or at least dangerous hit or play happens, usually the NHL Department of Player Safety the next day says that they're going to have a hearing with that player about the situation. And sometimes that can mean that they just decide no further action is necessary and the player gets off with sometimes just like a $5,000 fine or something, which in and of itself is a whole different issue. But anyway, what usually ends up happening is the player ends up with a 1 to sometimes 3 or 5 game suspension if things are really bad. And sure enough, that's what we saw with the Alexiak hit. There was a hearing the next day, which I think was to be expected, and somehow in that hearing, they galaxy brained their way into thinking that a 3-game suspension was somehow warranted out of that situation. Which again, as I've said a couple of times now, I do think was a little bit much for the situation, but fine, maybe the NHL is finally getting around to cracking down on hits to the head like they've said they're going to do for a few years now, and it kind of been a bit hit or miss with actually cracking down on them, but better late than never, I guess. But then, not 2 days later, literally 2 days later, Lombard plasters Schultz into the boards on a clearly dirty hit, head first, and what happens? There's not even a hearing. I mean, what are we doing here? At this point, there's pretty much 3 options for how the NHL is handling this. 1, somebody at the Department of Player Safety really doesn't like Alexiak, or maybe just the Kraken in general, or I guess they're just in a bad mood that day. 2, they only care about protecting players' heads when the games happen on Fridays. Or 3, and honestly, I think this is probably the most likely situation, as we know is the case in the NFL, and as the hockey guy has apparently already pointed out in the NHL, they legitimately have a wheel that they just kind of spin whenever something happens to figure out what the discipline is going to be. So if you don't want to get suspended, don't make a bad hit, and don't roll the wheel, or spin it, or whatever. So at the end of the day, well, nobody outside the NHL front office, which includes the teams themselves, have any idea what the heck they're thinking inside of it. We know one thing for sure, and that is that nothing is likely to change anytime soon. Because for the NHL, why would you spend time on things like player safety when you can spend that time and money making sure that there are virtual ads on the boards that distract all of the fans that everyone hates? After all, it's not the players that bring in the money. No, they take your money. It's the ads that bring in the money. And so now, to top it all off, as we get back to the game, because yeah, there's still a game to talk about, coming into Tuesday night's games, Lombard is still in the lineup for the Panthers, playing like nothing ever happened, and the Kraken are down 2 defensemen, thanks to the Department of Player Safety, which apparently is being run, well, worse than if Elon Musk was in charge. Okay, sorry about the tangent. All that to say, Schultz is not in the lineup for the Kraken. Gustav Olofsson, who they call up from the AHL, is in the lineup and playing on the third pair with Cale Fleury. Hayden Fleury was on the other side of the ice playing for the Lightning, so the two of them get to share the ice for the first time since they both played for the Kraken last year, as Seattle for the first time takes on a player that played an entire season with them. Again though, even aside from the lineup, there was also a roster change for the Kraken in this game, as they pick up off of waivers from the Nashville Predators, Eli Tolvanen, who is a former first-round pick, 30th overall by the Predators, a 23-year-old forward who has had a bit of an iffy start to his NHL career, but he's still young, has an incredible shot, and plays pretty physically for a 5'10" forward. And again, still a pretty young player, he comes to the Kraken off of back-to-back 11-goal seasons, and so far this year in 13 games, has 4 points with 2 goals and 2 assists. So we'll see what he can do, probably just a depth piece, and either way, he's going to have to earn his way into the lineup, just like what we saw with Wright. And since I brought it up, don't worry, by the time Wright gets back from the World Juniors, which he officially made the team, so not that there was really a worry he wouldn't, he will officially be playing in that. But when he comes back, he and Tolvanen are not going to be competing for ice time. Tolvanen is very much a winger, and Wright, the plan is to be at center. So again, I don't think Tolvanen is going to take too much time away from Wright. What picking up Tolvanen did take away from the Kraken, though, was Carson Kuhlman, as in order to make room for him to get onto the roster, Kuhlman got waived and didn't end up making it through waivers as he was claimed by the Winnipeg Jets and might end up getting some ice time coming back to Seattle for that first or the next home game for the Kraken as they'll take on the Jets for the second time this season. Anyway, with all that having been said, we do now finally get to this game against the Lightning, which, like I said, I mean, it's not really a game we're going to focus on too much. Yeah, the team probably has some things they're going to want to learn from it, but honestly, as fans, I think it's one we can kind of just move on from. The Kraken do not show up on time whatsoever, and a minute and a half into the game, the puck is in the net for the first time. And this one, there's really not a lot Grubauer can do about it. It's a shot from the point from, I think it was Ian Cole, that just bounces off guys in front of the net. I think it ultimately ends up going off of Borgen, but again, it changes directions right in front of the net. It's going wide of the net. I think he was trying to get to point off to the side, but Grubauer has no chance on the tip, and it's into the back of the net early. Unfortunately, unlike with the Florida game, the Kraken were not able to bounce back after this first goal goes in, or really change much of anything as far as the flow of the game, as the Panthers continue to press into the Kraken end, and a couple minutes later, it's 2-0, and this one is a little bit on Grubauer. He certainly sees the shot coming all the way. Ultimately, it's a nice play by Braden Point to get the puck into the offensive zone in the first place and get it out to Cernak, who does have all sorts of time and space to pick where he wants to shoot the puck and wind up and take that shot. And he does put it in absolutely a perfect spot, top corner on the far side. So, I mean, there's only so much Grubauer can do. Yes, he sees the shot coming all the way, but it's an absolutely perfect shot that Cernak, again, had all the time in the world to make. And it's at this point that the Kraken, now already almost halfway through the first period and down 2 goals, finally start to realize that the game is actually happening and wake up into it, and really play pretty well through the rest of the first period, getting a number of chances off on goal over the next few minutes. But again, like we've seen the last few games, they're having a hard time to get anything past the goaltender, which in this case is one of the perennial best goaltenders in the NHL in Andrei Vasilevsky, who has a couple Vezinas to show for it. Or actually, I think just one Vezina, but he could easily have more. But finally, just as we're closing into the last couple of minutes of what otherwise would have been the 4th consecutive goalless period in Tampa Bay for the Kraken to start off their franchise history, Eberle makes a nice block in the defensive zone and quickly picks up the puck and turns it into a 2-on-1 chance going down the other way, with McCann on the other side of the ice, eventually making a beautiful saucer pass over the lone defenseman. McCann has, well, pretty much empty net to shoot at, and he puts it into the back of it, just past Vasilevsky, who's diving back to the other side, trying to make the spectacular save, but he isn't able to, and the Kraken are able to pull to within 1 just before the period ends. But then we get to the second period, where, I guess to be fair, although the Kraken do end up with a penalty kill very early on in it, they are able to kill that off, and then take control of the game really for the next few minutes, pressing hard to try to tie up the game. Again, Vasilevsky comes up big a few times for the Lightning, preventing the Kraken from doing that, right up until Tanev takes a penalty behind the Tampa Bay net. He gets called for tripping, which on the replay, it didn't look like he actually even hit Fleury with his stick. It is Hayden Fleury who draws the call, so it might have been a bit of a bad call. Either way, the Kraken almost make it not matter whatsoever, as they have almost the best penalty kill we've seen all season. In fact, through the first minute of it, I think they may have had the puck for longer than Tampa Bay did on their own power play. But eventually, in the literal final seconds of the power play, I think with 10 seconds left, Tampa Bay eventually gets handle of the puck. They quickly get the puck through the neutral zone up to Perry, who is cherry-picking behind the Kraken defense, completely forgotten about, standing in the corner by the boards right by the blue line. He gets the puck, gets into the offensive end with a fair amount of space, but then kind of just freezes like we've seen some Kraken players do, looking for a pass rather than shooting the puck. Eventually decides to shoot it, but just as he does that, Dunn is able to get his stick on Perry's stick and prevent really much of a shot getting off. However, that shot does still get off just barely, and it ends up in the back of the net through the short side on Grubauer, and this is one that he just absolutely has to come up with a save on. Again, not only was Perry only able to get half a shot off, if that, thanks to Dunn, but Grubauer saw this shot coming all the way as there wasn't much of a screen in front of him to speak of, and still the puck out somehow gets through him short side on the near post and into the back of the net, which should have been pretty closed off by Grubauer if he's in the proper position. And so with that, in spite of a dominating penalty kill by the Kraken that did pretty much everything short of scoring themselves, with 5 seconds left in the power play for the Lightning, their first shot attempt on goal finds its way into the back of the net, and they have a 3-1 lead. And that's pretty much where the wheels fall off entirely. Just over a minute later, Braden Point gets the puck in the Kraken end of the neutral zone past 2 of the Kraken forwards, but he's all alone and still has 3 Kraken players between him and the net, outside of Grubauer, so I guess you could say 4 Kraken players. But he's able to split Burakovsky and Dunn, and then absolutely juke the pants off of Larson. A highlight reel move for sure, going straight through all 3 Kraken players, and 3 of the better Kraken players at that, and then puts a very nice, perfect backhand shot on Grubauer that of course goes over his shoulder and into the top of the net to give the Lightning now the 4-1 lead. And again with this one, since it is a backhanded shot in tight, the Grubauer knows where the shot's going to come from the whole way. It's probably one you'd like to see him save, but the shot never should have been allowed in the first place, as Point got through 3 Kraken players to get to Grubauer in the first place. And I mean, Braden Point's just a very good player, and ultimately, I mean, this is just a highlight reel play from a player that makes a lot of those plays. Regardless though of who and how many Kraken players are to blame for how we got here, the fact remains that it's now 4 goals into the back of the Kraken net against a team that doesn't allow more than 4 goals very often. Especially considering, again, a minute and a half ago the score was 2-1, it makes sense that shortly after this, not immediately after, but the whistle after puck is dropped, Grubauer ends up getting pulled and Jones goes in net. But it doesn't take long. In fact, I think it's like 2 minutes after Jones is in net, the first shot on goal is in the back of it. It's 5-1. Like the first Lightning goal of the game, and actually pretty similar to it, this one comes on a shot from the outside that is tipped just in front of the net and in past Jones, who really doesn't have much of a chance to make the save. One, again, because the change of direction right in front of the net, but also because the guy who tips it in, this time actually a Lightning player, is standing right in front of Jones, screening him the whole way so he can't actually see the shot. And to make matters worse, he got there because he was completely forgotten about by the Kraken defense. Colton just allowed to stand in front of the net, get his stick on the puck, and make it 5-1. And at this point, seemingly miraculously, the score stays 5-1 into the third. And then the third period kind of just happens. It's a complete mess. At this point, everyone knows the game's basically over. And there was already chippiness coming into the third, but with the game, I think, again, pretty much acknowledged that it was over. That boils over, and there's just constant scrums. Every time there's a whistle, there's guys fighting along the boards. Penalties all over the place. A couple of them lead to a 4-on-4 chance, in that 4-on-4 chance, kind of 5 minutes in, the Lightning score again. And again, it also comes off of the Kraken completely forgetting about a guy behind the defense. This time, it happens to be Steven Stamkos, who gets the puck, gets around Larson, who notices, oh crap, Stamkos is behind me and in front of my goaltender, but it's too late. Stamkos gets the puck from his backhand to his forehand to the other side of the net. Jones does make the first save, but Stamkos is able to get the rebound and lift that over the pad of Jones and into the net to make it 6-1. And again, the rest of the third from there is pretty much a complete mess. A few more fights, a lot of traded penalties that'll make the power play and penalty kill stats look all weird by the end of this game, but either way, really not anything of note happens the rest of the way. The Kraken do score, but again, it makes it 6-2, and it comes in the final seconds of the game. So while it is a goal, I guess technically it's noteworthy, but hardly. But since it is a Kraken goal, we'll show it anyway. With 5 seconds left in the game, actually just under 5 seconds when the puck goes in, Ryan Donato kind of takes the puck on his backhand up sort of along the boards, kind of through the face-off circle, and then just kind of fires it on frustratedly at the net, backhanded from a tight angle, and it somehow ends up in the back of the net. It's a pretty soft goal Vasilevsky lets up here, but again, it hardly matters at this point in the game. The Kraken weren't going to score 4 more goals in 4 seconds to send it to overtime or anything like that. So yeah, anyway, the Kraken ended up losing 6-2. A game, like I said, that's one to forget about going forward. As far as stars in the game, no. I mean, you could maybe give one to like Eberle and McCann. They had a pretty good play there. But really, the Kraken as a team didn't play well enough, I feel like, to give out stars in this game. As most of you probably already know, especially watching this video at this point in it, I will give them out even in losses to guys that I feel like played well enough to win. I'm just not really sure there were any of those players on the Kraken in this game, and certainly not that stood out enough to be worth doing. But anyway, with that having been said, please, as always, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are there guys you feel like were worthy of getting stars in this game? I'm sure most of you have already commented on the whole Lombard situation, which that whole fiasco is something that's just going to continue to frustrate fans into the future. I don't know. As long as Bettman is in charge, I don't think that's going to change. So I guess it is what it is now. And either way, the Kraken are going to have to find a way to bounce back. In Carolina, the old home of Ron Francis, John Forsland, and all sorts of other people within the Kraken organization. And I mean, I guess the good news is the Seahawks play on the same day. And so far this season, when the Seahawks and Kraken play on the same day, it doesn't end well for the Seahawks, but it does usually end well for the Kraken. Until then, though, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. As always, stay safe out there, be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken.